Welcome to Spoiler Alert. I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler.
I'm Callin Godson-Green.
And where are we?
We're at NRA, the National Restaurant Association 2026.
That's right. We're in Chicago, Illinois, amidst a big public concert with Bruno Mars and a marathon. And we're in the Tech Pavilion at the McCormick Place. Huge facility. And there are so many sights and sounds and even smells.
Food.
The food is incredible, but we're hoping that our conversation here is going to be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we are here with Jerry from Cafe Rio. And Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Jerry Juneau. I'm with Cafe Rio, regional brand out west. We have 152 restaurants in 10 states.
Only small.
I'm the director of training and food safety. And I came in as a corporate trainer and really absorbed food safety as part of my role over the last 15 years. For about the last 10, it's been the majority of my job.
Such a capacity where multiple levels of pressure and change.
Sure.
And we were talking before we started recording that you have multiple locations in California and other states. How many states?
10 states.
10 states. That in itself creates a challenge in that not every state has the same regulations.
They're all
and
different,
requirements.
right? I mean, there's a national food code or a model food code. Each state adopts it a little differently. So we have to be aware of that. And also food safety is more challenging the larger you grow. You know, the complexity in all these different restaurants doing the same thing the same way, or they're supposed to do it anyway, becomes very difficult to achieve. You know, and so when I started at Cafe Rio, you know, we only had about 50 restaurants. And so we've grown by 100 since then. And we did everything on paper, which is what most restaurants did 10 years ago. You know, you had a log book and you recorded everything. And then, you know, your ability to do the same thing the same way in all the restaurants is almost based upon pinky swears, right? They promise you they're going to do it a certain way, you know, but you don't have any way of checking to make sure that happens.
Oh, how do you know until you're in the doors?
That's right. Right. And so, you know, that kind of challenge was crazy. And at my company, when we were smaller, they were really kind of content with that being the way we did things, right? People wrote it down, you know, but it alarmed me because I saw as we grew, unless we became more sophisticated in how we managed our food safety programs, you know, that's a recipe for disaster, you know? And so what I did was I went to our leadership team and asked if I could do an analysis of our logs. Hauled them all into the office. We spent about 30 days taking a look at all the logs and measuring the level of compliance, and we ended up with, and I've told the story 100 times, right, 41% compliance. So 59% of our logs were blank or not filled out correctly. And that was the leverage I used actually to come to this very show 10 years ago, you know, because I was looking for a cloud-based logging system where I could, you know, look at what people were doing every day in the restaurants by going on a dashboard. And could I talk about that for just a moment?
Please.
So you know, when you want to create change in restaurants, when you want a behavior in restaurants, and I don't know anything about other business. It's all been restaurants for me for 50 years.
That's all that matters. Don't worry.
So in restaurants, right, if you want something to do something a certain way, you have to create a standard. That means it has to be in writing so you can duplicate it. So you can put the same duplicated standard in all the restaurants. Then you have to have a way to measure it. And then you have to have a way to audit it. And ultimately, you probably should have a way to incent it. So unless you do those four things, nothing ever really changes. You know, so what I wanted to do was create a system where everything was in writing. I could measure it because I could run a report that shows the level of compliance. And then I actually added it to our private auditing services. So the restaurants are measured and evaluated at least 5 times a year on how well they log as one of their critical standards. And then we incent them on that. You know, they achieve bonuses based upon their levels of achievement, you know?
What's crazy when you look at what you're talking about, and, you know, the first thing that I would imagine people think about is that if I go to your restaurant in Lake Forest, California, and then I go to your restaurant in Salt Lake City, I want to have the same menu, the same experience,
Absolutely.
the same service, but I also want the same food safety standards.
That's absolutely true. I will tell you, though, that I don't think customers think a lot about that.
I
right?
agree.
They put their safety in our hands, right? They go to our restaurant, they assume that the restaurant that they're eating at is taking the proper care with their food so that when they get it, you know, they're going to think about the flavor, they're going to think about the speed of service, the hospitality, but they're not going to think about food safety unless something happens.
Yep.
You know, and so, but I take it seriously, you know, every single thing that we do in the restaurants is about protecting the food from the time the ingredient comes to the restaurant till the time it goes to a customer. That involves procedural things, that involves cleanliness, and involves taking the temperatures appropriate. It means holding things a certain amount of time. And the managers have to be trained and certified to be able to spot a problem when it exists. So what Jolt, now SmartSense, does is it helps me with the audit and measurement piece, right? I'm able to go on a dashboard and type in a restaurant and look and see whether or not they're logging correctly, whether or not they're using the right equipment, right? Whether they're doing it on time, and I run reports regularly and I give the restaurants feedback on that.
Yeah.
It's been great. So that's really how my relationship with Jolt started, right? I wanted a place where I could go and look at the time, 60 restaurants, go into a dashboard, pull it up and see how everybody was doing it anytime I wanted it. But the cool thing is that it's grown. We started with a cloud-based logging system, which is basically just lists and temperatures and commands that people have to do on a scheduled list at a certain time. But, it's grown. We now use SmartSense Jolt to monitor the ambient air of all of our walk-in temperatures, right? That didn't exist when I started with Jolt, right?
Yeah.
That was something they came to me later and said, is this a product that you'd like to consider? Touchdown, man, because the way I monitored ambient air temperature in the walk-ins is we used a little manual. They called it a data logger.
Yeah.
They had to stick it in a computer every day. They had to run a report, right? And that was part of my audit, right? And those didn't happen right either all the time. And so now I can snap my fingers and look at any walk-in temperature that I want in all of my 152 restaurants, and I get alerts if there's any problems. It's pretty cool. But that wasn't even why I came to Jolt. It's something that I did afterwards. And then Jolt came to me with another product and said, would you like us to do label print, right? And now I print thousands of labels every week in all of my restaurants on demand, instantly, right? It's changed the game for me, and I can control that system from the same dashboard that I control everything else. It allows me to see what's happening. It allows me to make corrections when it's not.
Yeah.
It allows me to incent people on those behaviors, and health departments, they evaluate restaurants on risk. They lowered the risk levels in my restaurants because they saw the things that we're doing. It was an incredible advancement for how we do things. That was really how we transformed how we control food safety.
What sounds like one critical piece of this transformation, though, is speed. All the things you're talking about, you're able to get it so much faster, or to achieve those things so much faster.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely. So if you want to just use one example, I'll use the label printing as an example, right? So prior to this, people manually wrote out labels and placed them on products, right? 10, 15 seconds a label, right? Hundreds a day, right? Had to be, a lot of our product is controlled by time and not temperature. So every 4 hours, all the products have to get new labels, We added it up. We were spending, depending on the business of the store, between 2 and 4 hours a day just writing labels.
Wow.
So when we instituted the label system, which is by far from the restaurant standpoint, the most popular part of this program,
I'm sure.
right? We had 2 or 3 more hours at least to be able to redeploy to other things. We didn't cut the labor. We put it on cleanliness. We put it on customer service.
Yeah, guest-facing roles even,
And so if I have a label printer that's down for repair, right? And Jolt SmartSense is pretty good about supporting these things. So it's not down very long, right? It's like the world has ended. I get calls every day on when we're going to get this thing fixed. It's usually only a couple of days. Nobody wants to go back to manually write out labels.
An integral part of the business now. They're like, how do I do my job?
This JPS program is incredible. Just incredible.
Sure. Let me come back to culture, though. We had an experience about a year ago where we were talking with someone about how they were hiring very young employees and older employees. And the expectations around technology with the younger employees were X, and the older employees were nowhere in the vicinity.
That's a very common problem.
Yeah.
I would imagine that with technology that you're talking about, and even with the speed, are you aligning with some of those expectations, not only of your customers, but also of your workforce?
So it's a very real thing that the older employees have a more difficult time with technology, POS systems, computer stuff. If we hire a manager who's going to interface with a back of the house computer system, a lot of times they're very leery about learning those skills because they've never used it in the past. You don't really need that with this stuff, right? I mean, you open up an iPad, which anybody can use, right? And it takes 30 seconds to train, and they open up a list and they stick a thermometer in a product and it automatically imports the temperature. It's literally 5 seconds of work, right? So the training is about how to keep the probe safe by making sure it's sanitary, how often those temperatures have to be taken, but there hasn't really been a barrier with technology. And stuff like the sensors and the walk-ins and the GPS printer, I handle all that.
Yeah.
And it's not a lot. It's not a lot. If a sensor's down, I send them a note, replace the battery. If there's a problem with the printer, I can talk them or resetting it or whatever it is to take care of. It hasn't really been a barrier. We have many more barriers with a computer. I have general managers who ask, their assistants to, do computer work for them.
Yeah.
Just because they're uncomfortable getting in there.
Yeah.
So that hasn't really been a problem. And again, you mentioned speed. The speed of this stuff is, it's nothing.
Yeah.
If a restaurant hasn't taken the proper temperatures at the proper time, it's not because they don't have the time to do it. It's because they chose not to do it. And we can fix that. We can fix that easily.
Great point. Great point. So do you see technology, everything we've been talking about in terms of technology, do you see that as a critical ingredient in terms of further expansion of not only Cafe Rio, but any company?
It really is. I mean, the more restaurants we have, the more complex it is to make sure that everything's working the way it should. Food safety systems are the same in all the restaurants, right? We may have some different minor standards, in one state, they might require a different hot water temperature than the other states. And so what do? We just make sure that the standard is the same in all of them at the higher standard, so that they're all the same, right? Some states might have a different holding temperature on the line, right? So, we do one-offs and make sure that the systems reflect that. But the great thing about technology today is that if I open a new restaurant, for example, I'm opening a new one in St. George in July, right? They will have all of my monitoring systems installed, right? I will have all of the programming complete for the people that are in the system that will be held accountable to those long before they ever open that restaurant. And everybody is already aware of those systems, so there's no problem there. I cannot imagine going back to a paper-based system where I was dependent on a human being looking at it to make sure it's filled out correctly.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't work in today's world. And I will tell you that the expectations by the food code every year gets tighter as well.
Yeah.
Right? 10 years ago, there were, many different things in the food code that are just much tighter now.
Right.
Can I talk about one other piece of complexity I'd like to talk about? Do we have time?
Yeah, we got all the time in the world.
So one of the exciting things that I used Jolt and SmartSense for, so we moved about 4 years ago, we moved a lot of our products into a central kitchen. The meats and some of the sauces, and, the central kitchen, if you produce meat and ship it, has to be USDA certified.
Yep.
That was brand new to us, because we've never been a vendor of products before, and so I was challenged with creating HACCP plans and creating monitoring systems and logging systems that would be at the level that the USDA requires, which is completely different in terms of complexity and intensity than restaurants. And so my first thought was to ask the USDA who I should use to create those systems. They said, use anybody you want. That didn't help me very much.
Not at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, both the USDA and the FDA, they'll say, we like technology, but we won't tell you.
It's exactly what it was. They gave me nothing,
No,
right? So I called my friends at Jolt, and what they told me was that they had not done a USDA kitchen before, but they thought they could. And so they, I was on the phone and in person with them on site multiple times during the period of time, the 3 or 4 months that we had to get ready for our grant of certification.
Yeah.
Right. And they used the existing systems, which are even better now, right, to create a system that monitors everything we need, gives access to the USDA auditors, the things that we want them to see, right? They understand how to use the reporting because it's very easy, right? And they told me that we were the best prepared new startup for
Wow.
a USDA that they'd ever seen.
Wow.
Now, whether they just said that to smoke me, I don't know. But I took it as, and they've told me that multiple times since that, because I was convinced at one point, how are we going to get through this? It was quite intense.
Yeah.
But I basically, when they came in and I presented our systems, I presented Jolt, is what I did. And I took them through all our reporting, everything we measured, how we'd run reports and what we looked at. And they were absolutely delighted by it. And so when I've talked to my friends at Jolt, I think there's an opportunity there for business, right? Because there's thousands of USDA operations all over and they don't use Jolt.
Yeah.
Right. So it was quite fun. Right. And what I learned from building those systems for the central kitchen, I've taken some of those learnings and put them back into how I monitor the stuff in my regular restaurants.
Now, you have helped many facilities adopt new technologies. And here he's talking about, when there's new locations and they're starting with the technology embedded into it. Does that excite you to think of a place that from ground up, from day one, you already have the technology embedded within the systems?
Yeah. And I think, Jerry, even to your point about the age, not being really an issue or the aversion to technology, I think because it's ingrained now in the business, if we have, and we do work with customers that have never had technology and introducing it, like it's the change management. That's what like you brought up. Whereas now you guys are nearly 10 years into having tech. So now it's just part of it. It's like, good morning, like welcome to your first day. This is what we do. It's not like we're going to try this, the kind of uncertainty. It's just part of it. And that's there. And I think from your perspective, like you started with a problem of not having visibility unless you were on the ground, boots on the ground, which is impossible. It's fine when you have 5 restaurants that are all within 30-mile radius. As you grow, and everyone wants to grow, that's the thing. Like no one starts a business with the hope of having one location and never moving. That is the issue or the problem you had that you began with. And now like you're solving other problems that never became problems because you have the solution there. I think the USDA certification is a big one. And I actually ran into that as well in my past life. We grew too big, not too big. We grew big. So we needed a commissary. Brilliant, easy, happy days. Head of food safety, no problem. I do all these restaurants, work with the health department. And then you find out you're like, no. You're not going to health inspector in here now. USDA is involved. And then they're like, oh, also, but you have food products that aren't meat. So FDA probably needs to certify the other half of the business. And it's a completely different ballgame. Having one system even in place, obviously there's different, your CCPs are different in different locations, but having one system where you can house all of that and you understand how it works, they understand how it works, that I would say made your life exponentially easier than needing to, we could introduce some specific software for your USDA certification, but how does that help you,
And never, ever assume change management will be easy.
Oh.
It is not easy. I mean, even going from paper to electronics, right? Why are we doing this? It's different. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? My life is ending, right? Duplicate it, right? Document it, duplicate it, measure it, monitor it, and incent it. And over time, that moves people. Just assuming they're going to do it never works.
Well, the conversations I would imagine that this initiates, do you have different conversations with this technology in terms of recall simulations, even like different conversations with your insurance company? Hey, we have this technology. It's not just us insuring this technology, but look at how we're using this technology to better protect the safety of our product and our service. Lower our risk.
So by lowering our risk in our restaurants, right, that was a big deal for us because we, the health departments are showing us that they are more confident in what we do. In terms of liability, right, what they care about is that we have a system. We haven't seen any reduction in our rates due to, but we would not be able to be insured if we did not have a system, right? The USDA requires that we do mock recalls, right? That we are able to, because we're a vendor, if we have a problem with the product, who do we notify? How do we get it back? How do we ensure it does not go into commerce? And commerce is our own restaurants. I mean, we're our own vendor, but so it's a little different, but we have to be able to do all those things. and or else we can't be insured.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, I believe that all this has made us the safest restaurants in the business, right? I mean, we're really on top of this stuff, but you have to have a system that you can duplicate, measure, monitor, and incent, you know, and it really is working well. I'm really happy with our partnership.
Well, and both the awesome element and strangely enough, the tragic element is that all this value add is so that your customer can rest with those assumptions.
Correct.
In terms of
They're
whether
never
it has
going to
be-
think about. They're never going to think about it
Yeah.
unless I have a problem, which I never have. Right. Unless I have a problem, my customers are not going to worry about it. You know, they're just going to assume that everything's okay, and you know, and that's the way I want it. You know, I want us to worry about something. The last thing a customer needs to do is walk into a restaurant and wonder if their food is safe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't even want them to come into their head.
Yeah.
You know, what you want them to know is appreciate the value, the flavor, the experience in the restaurant, and we work this other stuff behind the scenes.
It's sad to say that as much as someone would say, oh, no one's going to walk into a restaurant and be like, no, there's a red flag, I'm going to walk out. It happens to me.
Well,
There are things
yeah.
that I sign. I mean, I'm sure we've all been there where it's like,
You're just
no.
not gonna-
But
We'll
there
just
are
go someplace
brands
else
that
today.
you would choose over
There
even
definitely
to
are.
walk into, because you know there's some that you'd be like, you'd walk right by the doors of. Whereas, yeah, you can walk into somewhere and then maybe decide not to, because obviously all of us being in food safety, but even walking in the door means that you have a respect for that brand and trust it. So
And the nightmare is, right, you have a problem in one restaurant, but I have 151 other restaurants
Yeah.
that are
Percentage.
potentially affected by it.
Exactly.
You know, the damage, you know, you can't, and it takes forever to get that back if you ever get it back.
yeah,
Exactly.
If you ever get it back.
Exactly. Jerry Juneau, Cafe Rio, Mexican Grill. I'm excited. I'm going to make an effort to revisit your restaurant. There's one not too far from where I live, and I'll let you know.
Sweet pork burrito, hot sauce, sour cream.
oh,
Do
there
it.
you go.
I'll do it.
Just send me a check in the mail, man. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.